Maria Burzillo, and today we're going to be going over the English portion of the 2016-2017 version of the ACT Test Prep book, and that's questions 1 through 15. Alright, so as usual, the first thing that we always want to do is read the entire passage. So I'm going to scroll through slowly. Please feel free to pause at any moment if you need to read more slowly. Take your time. Once you finish reading, please try and go through the questions on your own if you haven't already. Great, here we go. Alright. So hopefully you've read through the passage and have gotten a chance to answer the questions. Alright, let's talk about number 8. The habit of pulling water into its trunk, then releasing that water into its mouth develops only after months, as if witnessing other elephants doing so. So right here, the habit of pulling water into its trunk, that is a sentence fragment because we have this noun here, the subject, the habit, and it's being modified by this phrase of pulling water into its trunk, but we don't have a verb, so we can knock out F. Okay, so now let's think about G. The habit of pulling water into its trunk and then releasing that water into its mouth develops only. So that sounds pretty good. So let's keep that in the back of our mind. Number H, we can try to plug this in also. Plugging in can be a good test strategy if the answer is not immediately clear to you. Just make sure you don't spend too much time doing it. So here, if we plug in H, the habit of pulling water into its trunk, then by releasing. So that kind of makes it a little bit more confusing. So we don't want that. So we can cross out H. And then J, the habit of pulling water into its trunk, then releasing that water into its mouth. So that's creating a run-on sentence. So we know that G is going to have to be the correct answer. Alright, 9. Okay, so if we are using our answer from G, the sentence reads, the habit of pulling water into its trunk, then releasing that water into its mouth develops only after months, as if witnessing other elephants do so. So as if witnessing is introducing a sense of uncertainty, so we do not want that in something especially like a factual report, essay, journal, periodical thing. So we know that that's not going to be correct, so we're going to need some sort of change. So let's go ahead and consider B and D next. So both of these constructions are time constructions, when witnessing and then witnessing. So they're indicating the time at which something happened. The thing is that here we already have a time construction. We have after. So if we plug in either of these two, it makes the sentence a little bit more confusing because you have two different indicators of time that don't really make sense together. So for example, we have, if we plug in D, then releasing that water into its mouth develops only after months, then witness other elephants doing so. So that doesn't make sense. We can go ahead and cross that off. And then if you look at B, we have then releasing that water into its mouth develops only after months when witnessing other elephants doing so. So this one is a little bit more tricky than D. It's a little bit less obvious. But when witnessing is more indicating something that's happening at the time of whatever's going on in context of what you're reading. For example, when Eva and John went to the park, they swam. So those two things are happening at the same time, but here we have after, and so develops only after months when witnessing. It's a little bit awkward. And so B, we can probably guess is not going to be the right answer. So C, let's see, hopefully this makes sense. Then releasing that water into its mouth develops only after months of witnessing other elephants doing so. So C is correct. You can hear it sounds kind of correct, but also it's this preposition of is indicating what the elephant has been doing for months, months of witnessing. So that's clearly relating what the author is trying to say. So the best answer is C. All right, moving on. Number 10. One of Moss's most memorable observations in which this regard involved three elephants. So in which this regard is very wordy, so we're probably going to want to change that. So let's consider our options. One of Moss's most memorable observations in this regard involved three elephants. That makes sense. One of Moss's most memorable observations, ones that involved three elephants. That does not make sense. That creates an unclear sentence fragment. One of Moss's most memorable observations, which involved three elephants, that also creates a sentence fragment. So our correct answer here is going to be G. So I think this question is one that's important to trust your instinct. To me, when I read this, I think, oh, this should say in this regard. And maybe you've heard that phrase before, maybe you've read it places. And if you're ever unsure, I always think it's best just to trust your gut. Trust your gut on this. So if this answer jumps out at you, don't just skip the whole rest of the question, but it's a pretty good bet that this is going to be the correct answer. All right, number 11. Another example of parallel structure. So, Enid, a 10-year-old female, and Eli, also named by Moss. So, here we go. Let's see. So, this phrase is describing Enid as a 10-year-old female. And this phrase is describing Eli, also named by Moss. So when you have two subjects and two descriptive phrases describing each, usually they want to say the same thing. So because this is talking about age, and this is talking about name, it's unlikely that we want to leave it as it is. In fact, we do want to change it. Another way to tell that we need to change it is because the phrase also named by Moss assumes that earlier in this passage, we've talked about another elephant named by Moss, which we haven't. So that doesn't make sense. So because this is talking about age for Enid, we want to talk about Eli's age as well. So that means the best answer here is going to be B. We know that C and D are incorrect because they're redundant. This whole passage is about elephants, so it would be unnecessary to specify that fact. And we've already mentioned here that there's three elephants involved. Alright, let's move on. Number 12. Eli not only overcame his early limitations, but he also grew up to be a confident young bull. Alright, so here's a classic example of not only, but also, which is a very common structure. So this probably will come up on your test. So the important thing to know with this is that whatever comes after the not only needs to match what comes after the but also. So here we have not only overcame and but also grew up. So since these verbs are both in the past tense, we do not need to change this sentence. So it is correct as is, and F is the correct answer. Alright, number 13. For the sake of logic and cohesion, the best placement for sentence 7 would be. Alright, so sentence 7 is, Eli was born with deformed feet that initially prevented him from walking. So a good question to ask yourself for this is, why do we put a sentence anywhere? We put something somewhere because it is serving a specific role in developing an argument or strengthening the purpose of what you're trying to say. So this sentence here is giving key context as to why Eli might need some extra help, and just some general background on Eli as an elephant. Therefore, it does not make sense to put it at the end here where we've already finished talking about Eli. So we know we're going to have to change it. D is going to be our correct answer here because B and C, if you go back to sentence 1 and sentence 3, Eli hasn't been introduced yet. Eli is only introduced at sentence 4, so it makes sense to place this descriptive phrase about Eli after sentence 4, leaving D as the correct answer. Alright, number 14. Moss has brought compelling stories and information about elephants is provided to an ever-expanding audience. So this phrase is incorrect. It is awkward, it creates a sense of unclarity, or lessens the clarity, I guess, would be more correct to say. So we're going to have to change this. So again, here's an example of when I would probably do a guess and check. So let's go through the options here. Moss has brought compelling stories and information about elephants is given to her, too. So that doesn't make sense here. That's kind of just as confusing. Moss has brought compelling stories and information about elephants is reaching. That's kind of the same thing. It doesn't make sense. It's creating fragments. So let's try J. Moss has brought compelling stories and information about elephants to an ever-expanding audience. So this is correct. It creates clarity. We know who Moss is bringing these compelling stories to. It's connecting these two parts of the sentence. Therefore, the answer is going to be J. All right, final question. Would this essay accomplish the goal of writing a brief essay focusing on some aspect of animal behavior in the wild? So, this question is asking you about kind of the gist of the paragraph. Do you understand what's going on? Can you tell what the purpose is? Etc. So another example of why you should read the whole thing. So let's think about this. Is this essay successfully focusing on some aspect of animal behavior in the wild? Well, we can say yes, because it's talking about elephants and about how they learn to survive. So we can cross out C and D. Another way you can know that these are incorrect is because here it's talking about comparing Kenyan elephants to other elephants in Africa. It doesn't do that. And also because Moss is not studying in zoos. So C and D are out. And we can then tell that B is going to be the best answer because A implies that the essay is focusing and primarily about Moss's research about how elephants identify their family members, which is not really what this sentence has been talking about in this paragraph. Alright guys, so that's going to do it for this video. Just a few quick tips to recap. Always look out for and avoid wordy or redundant phrases. You really want to get your point across in good writing in a concise manner. So you don't want to be repeating tons of information or adding things that are just going to make your meaning less clear. Additionally, always look out for parallel structures. So the key one here being not only but also. So you want to make sure your verb tenses match on either side of that, that generally you're talking about the same kind of thing on both sides of that. Also, look out for sentence fragments. You always need a subject and a verb. And finally, trust your instincts. Alright, thanks for watching. I hope that was helpful and good luck on your test.